Cool. All right, we'll get going then. So I wanted to talk about pods because I really like pods. I sort of only recently started joining in with pods with the Nexus group, and so far I've found them to be pretty awesome. So I thought it was a really useful tool for coaches. So I wanted to share it and make sure that all of New Zealand Ultimate knew about it. So pod. Is this? Oh. Yes. Okay. Cool. So one of the main things that I think pod's really good is this article that I read about. It's from 2014, so it's pretty old, but I think it's still pretty relevant. And it was talking about how can non-US teams close the gap between us and the States. I think we've not really closed the gap in the last few years a whole lot, so it's probably still pretty relevant. And the three main things that I got from it was more consistent throwing. They said getting youth programs going and getting more players and more competition. And I think that pod is really great for the more consistent throwing part. So the author said, is from Great Britain. So I said, my own thoughts from the perspective of Great Britain are that I think that at our best, we can match all US teams' qualities, athleticism, knowledge, experience, etc. The way that we consistently fail is simply throwing skill and the ability to consistently execute those throws under pressure. And I've got the link there if anyone wants to read it. And I think we could probably go one step further and say that consistently executing catching under pressure is another thing. So sort of that throwing and catching element. If you think about, like the Eva, our best player in the country, the main thing that comes to mind is like those incredible layout grabs that she makes, and just being able to catch a high disc and sky someone when there's like one or two defenders right there. And that ability to catch under pressure, as well as the throwing, is part of what makes her so great. And I think that, really shines through. So for me, pods are a way that we can get more throwing in. They are essentially just focused throwing sessions. But I think under the umbrella of pod, you can kind of get a little bit more out of it than just going out and throwing with some friends. So what makes pod great? For players, I think it's great for players and for coaching. So from playing perspective, the number one thing that makes pod great is that you get lots of repetition. It's all about lots of throwing, lots of catching, maybe lots of some agility drills, but it's all about getting extra time with the disc in hand. For anyone that's read Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, he talks about the 10,000 hours rule. So if you think about, we train maybe once a week for a couple of hours, it's really hard to build up those 10,000 hours. But pod is a sort of a shorter, more easily accessible version of training, which will help us to get those 10,000 hours that will really solidify our throwing and catching skills. One great thing about pod is you don't need many people, so you can do it at a location or a time that only suits 3 or 4 people, so it can be really accessible. We had one at 7 o'clock on a Thursday morning, which is not accessible to a lot of people. A lot of people don't want to be awake at that time, but for the 4 or 5 of us that made it, it was a time that we knew we could commit to every week, and was really useful for us. You get lots of one-on-one advice because often you're only going to get 3 or 4 people, so you can kind of have those discussions, or one-on-one advice for the coach advice, or discussions within 2 or 3 people, and really kind of come up with your own understanding of what's, how to improve that throw, or what's going wrong in this situation. And then because you end up spending a lot of time with, a small group of people, it's a really good way of bonding as a team, and forming those friendships within your team. Especially for me coming back from being overseas, it was really useful. Yes, and sometimes we scrap the throwing and we just do coffee, which is also fun. Cool. And then from a coaching perspective, um, I find it's really great as a coach. You spend a lot of time with a small group of people, and across multiple pods, you can you can really hone in on those individual players and focus on specific skills that they need to work on. You can understand their role or their potential better. You get a chance to actually sort of sit and talk to those players and figure out what their goals are, why they're playing Ultimate, what do they want to learn. And it was really useful for learning how those players receive feedback and advice the best way. You might notice that someone's sort of withdrawn at pod, and it's much easier to notice in that smaller environment that maybe the way that you gave that feedback didn't work, and you can adjust that, or you can just ask the question, because you're only dealing with 4 or 5 people max normally at a time, which makes it really easy to personalize your feedback. And then because you're really just focusing on skills that a few people need, you can be really creative. You need to be creative because you might only have 3 or 4 people, and a lot of the drills we normally run at trainings require kind of 6, 7, 8 people minimum to run smoothly. So you've got to get really creative about how you are running drills. And so yeah, I really enjoyed it from that perspective of just saying I want to work on. So one thing we were working on was catching high discs, and so we started off with just having throwing a high disc, and then I didn't want to jump straight from throwing to with no defense to throwing with lots of defense or like full-on defense. And so we really experimented with different ways of having a body there, but maybe that person couldn't jump. So it gave you an example and an opportunity to have a body there, but someone who wasn't jumping. Or one that I had a lot of fun with, we just had everyone in a crowd and we'd throw the disc really high to that person and yell out a name. And you had to kind of get around this group of people who weren't trying to catch the disc at all. They were just in the way. So it was kind of trying to build from catching high discs with no defense all the way to catching with intense defense without just traditionally we just make that big jump straight away. So that was a lot of creativity and experimenting. The one-on-one advice and discussions are really great for coaches as well. You definitely benefit from that. And I think it's a really good safe space for new coaches. You've only got 3, 4, 5 people that you have to coach, as it were, which means that it's not standing in front of a team of 20 or more people. It's really just kind of having conversations with people. And it can be really structured. So you just have to know to go from one drill to the next without having to necessarily have all the answers or feeling like you need to have all the answers. So I think pod's a really good opportunity for someone who wants to kind of make a step up into that leadership with their team to do some of that as well. Are there any questions or thoughts on what I've said? Have I missed anything, Nexus girls, about what makes pod so awesome?
I'll add one thing in Auckland with Womxn's, just again, that timing and accessibility side of it. We had some girls that were fun employed, and so they were free during the day. So they chose to meet like late morning, and some of them also just had really flexible jobs. So a better time for them was like midday, when people who work 9 to 5s, that wouldn't necessarily work for them. So I really like that point that it lets people find a time that works for them. And especially when someone might think, oh, I can't, am I the only one who's free at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday? It lets them figure out who else is free and put sort of some ownership on the players themselves to figure out, make those connections and bond and kind of build relationships with their teammates. So that was cool.
Cool. Great, thank you. Yeah, I think that's a really key part to it for me, is that it's just you can find time that suits. You just need 2 or 3 people to be free at the same time, and you can create a little mini training. Cool. So now that we agree that pod's awesome, we're going to talk about sort of the components that make a pod. You can, again, with the creativity, there's an element of you can kind of do whatever you want. But oh, and I started creating a spreadsheet with some of the ideas of drills that we've used, and I thought we could kind of build on that. And then it's just a little mini database of drills that you can do with 2, 3, 4 people, that you can kind of take away with you. But I think based on, going back to what I said at the start about throwing being a really key thing that separates the US from the rest of the world, I think throwing is an important part of pods. And it can be kind of anything. I personally am not a huge fan of things like 70 throws in a general sense, on like an all the time kind of thing, but I do like it in a sense of start with 70 throws and then find one that you were struggling with and then spend time on that one throw for a while, because I think that repetition is really key. And so only doing 10 throws of each one is maybe not quite that much repetition, but spend 5-10 minutes working on your low release backhand, and you're going to notice that it's improving, especially over the course of a couple of weeks. Or you can focus on one aspect of the throw. We did some floppy throwing at our drills, which is trying to really relax our arm, which I read an article that said that would help us throw further, so we gave it a go. Practicing kind of throwing in a fake and then throwing your pass, and kind of just doing that over and over again is really going to help with building the muscle memory. And then also with throwing drills, you can include using cutting or throwing to moving targets. So we used our pods as an opportunity to practice our resets with Nexus. And then we also recently implemented a drill that I think Tim did at Fire to the Camp, where it was trying to throw a pass to a moving target as early as possible and as late as possible, which really helped you work on your touch and then your kind of accuracy with those really late throws, which again is something that can happen in a game. And we are so used to throwing to perfectly timed cuts and perfectly timed throws that when we have to sort of rush that throw because we're throwing it late, that's where the mistakes creep in. And that's where the mistakes don't creep in for the States, I think. So there's so many options for throwing and kind of coming up with lots of different creativity there. Does anyone have any throwing drills that they particularly like? We can talk about it a bit later as well. Cool. Yes.
I just want to say for the throwing drills, we did like a lot of three-man throwing drills, which was like simple, but I find it so hard of throwing like a mark in a game, because when we're just doing throws out of mark, normally it's so different. So it was really good to do that.
Yeah, that's true. We did three-man drill, three-person drill, but we also did sort of stationary three-person drill, if you want. So the defense was kind of just standing there. So because again, we often go from fake throw with no defense to fake throw with full defense. So this kind of gave us that in-between step of there's a person there who I have to pivot around to get the disc off, but I don't have to worry about them hand blocking me. So it kind of takes away some of that pressure while still practicing in a slightly more realistic situation. So yeah, that was I found it really useful because I know I don't pivot even in three-person drill. So sort of taking out the intensity and the stress of someone who might hand block me while practicing that pivot in a more realistic situation was quite useful. Cool. And then we've got catching drills. So there's lots of different types of catching drills. You can just do catching with, one-handed and offhand and stuff just in your peers. You can set yourself up with a cut so that you're running towards the disc, throwing the disc as high and floaty as you possibly can, add defense in. And something that Tara and I tried but didn't successfully use it in a game was we would try and practice some layouts at the end of pod, which again I think is I can't think of a single person in the States who's not laying out to catch for D, and definitely it gives them an extra edge. So it's good to practice in a really safe space like a pod before just trying to force yourself to throw your body around, which I know I find terrifying. And then this is something that we had it as optional. Basically, we often didn't do it because I think a lot of people were doing stuff on their own, but it can also be a really good opportunity to practice some agility and speed work, especially if one person has a ladder and other people don't. If they bring it along, then it's an opportunity to do some ladder work if you don't normally, or just, yeah, working on some sprint technique or using your Hollywood squares or whatever it is to develop. Those things take repetition as well. So if you kind of have already committed to meeting once a week at a time that suits, then adding 10, 15 minutes of that on at the beginning or the end or wherever is a really good way to make sure you're working on those skills as well, because they're all skills that don't take large groups of people to work on. Cool. So we got some examples there. Part of the reason that I now recently have been so excited by pod is because I've actually seen the success of pod over the past season. So personally, I couldn't throw a scuba at the start of the year, and then I got to throw one in the final, and it was on camera and everything. So like that was a huge thing for me. So we spent a lot of time, I think every pod, we always have a period of time where you can just work on a throw that's going to be the throw you're working on that season. And I spent every week, I would either work on my scubas or my lefty backhand or both. And I threw both of those throws at some point during nationals. So that was kind of my big success, where I was like, this is working. Doing it all the time is working, because those are throws that I've wanted to work on for a couple of seasons, but I've never just actually spent the time on it. And having this time at pod really forced me to do it. We also, so yeah, that's a throw or a skill that people maybe don't use. You can work on stuff that's been worked on at training. We did our resets, and I think we had some really good discussions about resets and how resets work or what to do in different situations. I think it's still very much a work in progress, but I found it really useful to just discuss what to do. And for I think a lot of people came with those questions that you go to training and you work on the resets and you're like, yeah, this makes sense. And then you go into a game and you think, actually, I don't know what I was meant to do in that situation. So by having the pod the next week or the next couple of weeks, it gave people an opportunity to have those questions come up later, and then a really clear space for them to raise those questions, rather than just waiting for resets to be covered at training again, which you can only do so many times in this season. And then what's sort of that individual aspect to it, something Tara really wanted to work on, catching high discs under pressure. So that's part of why we had a lot of work and a lot of fun coming up with different ways of practicing catching high discs. And I think at the recent the NTS tournament, she skied like 5 people or 6 people on my team when we were on different teams. So I was very pleased, but also a bit disappointed at the time. But again, it was just, there were some trainings where we'd be practicing catching high discs and all of us would just drop all the time. And so then to see kind of the success of that as well has really solidified, I think, the benefit of that repetition and having a structure for the team to all repeat these skills, throwing, catching, and otherwise. Cool. So does anyone have any questions on any of that? I really just wanted to mostly discuss ideas for most of this session. No? Cool. So what I thought we could do is talk about we could brainstorm some ideas for some throwing skills that maybe you might want to work on in a pod, and then we'll talk about some creative ways that we might practice those skills. So does anyone, you can type in the chat or otherwise if you have any ideas. Or you can just say it. Break throws, cool. Anything else?
I know we did this at pods, but like throwing and going just all the time, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah. Up to you.
Cool. Resets, which will come up again later. Taking. Uh-oh, I broke it. Cool.
Throwing into space.
Going into space.
I guess decision making, knowing which throw to throw when, or more importantly, what not to throw when.
That's a really cool one that I would like to go into. Cool. I had planned for breakout rooms. So I might send you into breakout rooms, which will be just 2 or 3 of you, maybe just 2 of you, together. And I want you to choose one of the throwing skill ideas and talk a little bit about how, like a drill that you already know that you can use, that we could use at a pod to, to practice that. But also, if you can, a slightly easier version of that drill and a slightly harder version of that drill. So kind of creating those levels of how to practice these skills. And yeah, and get a bit creative. So I breakout rooms. I'm going to create them now. And in your rooms, just choose one of the skills. Think of a drill and then try and make it easier and try and make it harder to try and create those levels. And you'll have 5 minutes. Hello.
Hello.
Hi, I put them all out in breakout rooms, but they're coming back now.
Oh,
Hopefully.
okay, sorry. We just literally like Noms and I just, well, sorry, it's Petra and we literally just finished in the gym, so we were just driving home and thought we would join in.
Oh, good. Let's go. Let's see. You're here for the good bit. I've done all my talking and now you can hear all the discussion.
Cool. We were discussing if we can join like while we are doing the workout, but then I managed to do my phone at home. So yeah, that was that didn't go well.
Might be a bit tricky.
Morning.
Oh, everyone back? I think they're closed anyway. All right. I didn't say, did everyone decide on someone to report back?
Yeah, we decided Zoe would do it.
Ah, nice. What was your skill, Zoe?
We picked throwing into space,
Cool.
and we talked about how you can just do that even without any cut. So have it be a thrower initiated throw into space. And obviously you can start by trying to make people just move a step or just reach out to catch it as opposed to trying to throw right in their bread box. And then you can obviously make that harder by expanding the range that you're trying to throw. So how far, pushing the boundaries of how far you're making the person move. You can add a defender. So obviously also a space you have to avoid throwing into. And obviously that person can play defense at different levels of intensity. And we also talked about trying to throw, seeing how different throws move into space. So obviously if you're throwing a hammer, that's going to not float as, or you can't put as much float on that as you potentially could with a backhand. And so seeing how different throws can be thrown into space.
Oh, that's really good. We'll use that next year in pod. Thanks for writing that for us.
You're welcome.
And the other group, did anyone want to share your skill and your ideas?
Sorry, I was cooking while participating. We started with long throws, sorry, let's start with that. And we kind of talked about dishy long is something that we kind of look for in long, like look to do with long throws, but it can be really hard at the start because you've got to focus on so many different elements and like timing your throw and how far you're throwing, how far you're throwing. So you can start with just like being in a pair and stepping out to see like what your range is, or if you already are aware of like what your range is, then kind of setting that point and then going from there. And then adding in like a box drill where you can throw to a certain space with someone running on to catch it there, because that's kind of like a progression towards the dishy long where you don't have that box you're aiming for, but rather you have a player you're aiming to hit and or like throw it to them in space. And then we kind of talked about like from there, and also with the box drill, you can look at releasing it as late as you can with like as much power or like as much float as you can and releasing it early or like whatever it is, kind of playing with that. But please, other team members, pitch in if I've forgotten stuff in there and missed it out. We covered a few different ways that you could go about it.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
cool.
sorry, my connection was pretty bad before, but I can add on to this. So basically, you can also do a fake so that you're kind of off balance to practice that long throw, and it kind of adds a bit more dynamicness into how you would throw in a game situation. So you throw a fake to be free in that like long throw.
Yeah, cool. Those are all really good ideas. which I think, I see. Like I think already right there, there's a pod or several weeks of pods that you can kind of build on those things. I think I just wanted to show a little bit how easy it is to come up with a pod. You can just choose a skill in 5 minutes between groups of 2 or 3. You pretty easily came up with a whole lot of ideas and different drills that we can use and like progressions of drills that you can use. So you could start with just throwing in pairs and finding your range, maybe move into a box drill on the first week. And then, a few weeks down the line, we might be doing the releasing really early and trying to float it, or releasing really late with power. And because the whole point is getting the repetition, having the same pod for long times is not an issue. Cool. Yes, so Joanna's asked how long our pod sessions were, normally about an hour, although like the morning one, we would be arriving around 7, 7:05, and the goal was always to be done before 8, so people could kind of get to work and clean up, which is part of the reason that we often didn't do the agility stuff. I think it was a timing thing. We just wanted to really focus on the throwing and the catching. But yeah, it's not, in the grand scheme of things, not a huge time commitment. I know, like I would go to work and get changed and didn't feel like I had to shower because we'd basically been static throwing and catching most of the time. And then there were other ones where I was pretty hard work. So I maybe did need to shower, maybe didn't shower but should have showered. Lots of different combinations. But yeah, we tried to aim for an hour more often than not. Cool. So I thought we could do one more of those. Thought we could talk a little bit about some catching skills or like common causes. So for catching especially, like throwing, the world of throwing is just ridiculous. Catching, I feel it's a lot about thinking about why did I drop that and how do I make sure I don't do that again. And it tends to be a little bit more, it's a slightly smaller world than just the whole wide world of throwing. But if you got any ideas for common causes for why people might drop discs, and then we'll do the breakout rooms again.
I know that for me, like my most common source is just not looking at it, like just assuming it's in my hand and not watching it until it gets in my hand. And one thing that we did with Eva at the NTS camp was just like, you're not too good to watch it until it's like in your hand and watch it for an extra second just to make sure it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about what you're going to throw before you've caught it.
Yeah, which is possibly linked. I can't catch with my left hand. Like it just literally moves slower than my right hand because I haven't built those muscles up. Wet disc on a rainy day, very common. Oh, thank you.
I guess kind of in with what you were just saying, Marah, is that you like can't catch your left hand, but being forced to catch in any way that is more awkward than just like two hands right in the breadbasket.
Cool.
Also, thinking about how to catch it. Like if you are hesitating too much, then sometimes like, and I think that's for a pole as well. Like if you're thinking about how to catch the pole, you might actually drop it in the end.
Yeah. Cool. So what we're going to do, I'm going to put you back into some groups, hopefully different groups. And if you think about one of those common causes, pressure from the marker, yeah. And then pick one that you want to try and see if you can practice and correct in some way. Oh. Recreate. Cool. And then nominate someone to share back your responses this time. So when I give you your 1 minute warning, you can work out who's going to do that. Hope they should be slightly different rooms this time. And then I will see you in 5 minutes.
Oh, whoops. I left Tara in like mid-sentence because I, sorry, because I was like enjoying the story. And then I thought I was closing the button. I was like, yeah, we've still got like 40 seconds, but I pressed the button that said leave and then I just like left. I did not mean to leave. Sorry about that.
You're all good. You're all good.
Anyway, she's telling me about her favorite catching drill.
Oh, well, she can tell. the
Luke's
whole group.
favorite.
No, I'm just
No,
mine
you can
was
tell the whole group because then I can. Well, I
Yeah.
probably would actually make you do it every week instead of. I was
Well,
going to.
we do it every week.
Yeah,
So.
don't worry. Yeah, it's this is why it's her least favorite because you always do it.
Yeah.
Mine was double disc. I just for some reason I was the worst at that at the Kotara camp and Liam kept making us do it, which is good. We should, but for some reason, I was a stinker at that.
All right. Who is going to share out of your group?
I can do it because I threw Zoe under the bus for the last round, so I'll step up and report back. So we did one, a drill that really just tackled every single thing on this list, but we meant to focus on basically pressure from the marker. So having someone there and just we like the drill where often the basic one is you both run out to a point and then you come back and you're going for that under disc to receive that pass. And the reason why it addresses a lot of these things is because it's having someone even just there, if they're not necessarily vying for that disc, it's still a distraction. It makes you focus. You have to watch the disc into your hands and you're also moving. And so just even that movement of your body can just add extra elements that you, again, have to really work on focus. And Tara mentioned that what you guys had done, I think at some previous practices was you don't just start from 0 to 60 and have both players like attacking the disc right off the bat. You can graduate up to that by giving the marker a couple of disadvantages, handicaps per se, just to give the offensive player a little bit of an advantage to really focus on the catching part of it. So for example, you both run out, but the defender can't run back. They just have to jog behind. So it's really just a presence there. Or maybe they can go just as fast, but they can't use their arms. They can only use their body. Or maybe they can only use their left hand or something like that. So it was just a nice creative way to create some different situations that still give a little bit of advantage to the person who's focusing on catching. And then we thought even for Steph's mention of a wet disc, you could wet the disc and just, it can really address all of them, throw different throws into that situation. But just basically having someone there can help people deal with some of that pressure with the mark.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've been thinking it'd be really cool to do that. And like that next level, if we can, like if you get the defender to not try and get the D, but just like, because a lot of us want to learn to lay out, like if you just try and force yourself to lay out beside the person, like that's going to be super distracting, and then it gets us used to falling on the ground. So something that I've been thinking about trying to do, mostly because I'm really focused on learning to lay out. And then I'm just hoping to like bring a few members of the team with me because I don't want to do it by myself. But yeah, thinking that just, having that person there, I really like that idea of trying to get the D with your body and not being able to use your arms. I think that'd be a lot of fun as a defender, while also kind of, giving that advantage to the offense. What about the rest of you, the other group?
We chose catching outside of bread basket range. So a common, I guess, drill is just getting someone to throw bad throws. So one example is to just do that short range passing between each other, chucking it high, chucking it low. But there's also another side of just throwing a bad throw intentionally and the same bad throw, like a really high throw, a really low throw, and you trying to stretch your own range of not being used to catching at that distance or that height, and getting someone to throw that same throw again for you to try and catch that same throw. So having different types of restrictions which cater to the stress that you're having with catching is quite good, and that can just change between each person. Catching while tired, that can also, I guess, change how focused you are with catching at a certain range. Like you have to kind of stay alert and stay focused even when you're tired, like in the game realistic situation. So that could be done after sprints, hard session of training, doing that throwing session at the end of the throwing really hard, so throwing with intention again. So people tend to be a bit scared of throwing or catching really strong, like really fast discs. So that's another example of throwing a bad throw with intention. Not really a bad throw, but just a difficult throw. Having a defender there can also be quite difficult. So just someone like Jana said, standing there and you kind of have to figure out how to get around them. That's also catching and getting around them. So it's a kind of a different range as well. Is anything else, Zoe or Petra knows? Just basically any type of
Yeah, that's really cool. I like what you said with the intentionally throwing bad throws, and you said it can be different for each person. I know that's something that sometimes people would say, like someone might be like, oh, I really want to practice catching low throws. So when we're doing some of these catching drills, they'd be like, on top of whatever else, you know, we've got this drill that we're working on, but I'm also, can you try and throw your disc really low so that I have to practice kind of catch really low discs? And then for someone else, you know, they're like, try and throw it so I lay out, or try and throw it so that I have to catch with my left hand or whatever. So it's really, you can kind of acknowledge where you have weaknesses and say, can you throw your bad throw in this way? Yes, yeah. Whenever we try to throw bad throws, it's a great opportunity to practice your lefty backhands or your high release forehands or whatever it is that throw you just definitely do not have yet because you've not started practicing, and you like this, you can practice at pod and then you're still really at the beginning stages of practicing it. Throwing that to someone is a great opportunity for them to practice catching throws that can go absolutely anywhere. So that's a really good opportunity to do both. Thanks, Tara. But that's pretty much us anyway. I was thinking about the overthinking one. I forgot to say what I was doing with the catching one, but with the throwing one, but with the catching one, I was thinking about that overthinking. And I thought it could be fun. You just have like a heckler on like beside you, or someone like, or even the defense isn't playing defense. They're running behind you, just being like, don't drop it, don't drop it, don't drop it, don't drop it. Trying to artificially create the pressure, trying to catch the pull is quite tricky. But that's sort of the best they came up with. And maybe that plus if you do drop it, then you have to do burpees or push-ups or something, might be kind of creating some of that pressure in what is otherwise not a very high pressure situation. But we might try that next at pod, just see how we go. I think you might at least find out like how to really focus in on your catching. You'll find yourself doing some of the things, you know, like watching the disc all the way into your hands, which you then can maybe take into a game situation and say, I didn't drop it when yeah, that's true.
Might not work for you, Marah, because you're quite good at math, I think.
Yeah,
but...
I'm a big fan of math. I really like that idea, but yeah, we'll just like throw equations at you.
Yeah. What's 4
times
times 4? Yeah. I don't know.
So yeah, which is, yeah, and that's I think some of the fun of pod. I was talking about it at the end, you know, you can be so creative as a coach. I think it's a great opportunity. Like I tried so many things at pod and we did something and we were like, oh no, that was awful, that didn't work, or no, it's too windy, we should never have done that in the wind, we'll have to try that again when it's not windy, which was not a thing in Wellington. But you know, like it's a very small group of people to just test things out on. So yeah, see what happens if you try and throw maths questions or anagrams or synonyms at people while they're catching, and like that kind of catching while distracted. You know, if you're throwing in pairs, you can't have the defense distraction. So maybe, yeah, throwing equations at them while they're catching it is going to artificially create some of that that pressure.
I would also say, I don't know, one of the things I greatly struggle with is when I'm going to catch and I know someone's free, and so I'm already thinking about how I want to throw to them. So having someone like yell poached or yell that they really want the disc, I don't know, along with the whole yelling at them as they catch topic.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and trying to get that throw off is, I think we did, trying to get that throw off as quickly as possible as well. When you know that someone's free, it'll help you with both the catching when you know something's happening, but also trying to get that throw off quickly. So both are really useful skills to have. So yeah, find ways to distract your catcher while they're catching is basically the sum of what we've just come up with. But I think, yeah, trying all these different things. I love the creativity you can have and the freedom you have at pod, because you've just got a small group of people who are just going to try and figure out how to improve in a different way. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's 10 minutes of 10 minutes of 3 people's time instead of 10 minutes of 30 people's time, so it doesn't feel like such a big waste. Cool. And we won't do the third brainstorm, but I do think it's a really useful thing for anyone that is coaching, if you're trying to set pods, like if you're running a training and you're like, this is so important, like for Nexus it was resets, like everyone needs to know what the resets are, and I would never stop saying how important resets are, and will never, you can't make me. So trying to, if you're working on something as a team and you're like, this is going to be a core structure for us, this is something that we want everyone in the team to have down pat, they can do it in their sleep, then trying to come up with a way that three or four people can do it at a pod type session is really, really useful. So now you just got to go and do it. Get a few friends from your team, from one of your teams, find a time that you can do regularly. Weekly is good, although obviously over winter it's a bit harder, but a time that you could do every time the weather's good. If you can find a time during the day, that obviously helps, but we've had the shortest day, so we're heading into more light, so you can do things after work again. Think about a skill, think about a throw that you've always wanted, have you always wanted to do a lefty backhand? Have you always wanted to have a high release forehand? And so then every time you go out and do these throws, do that for 5-10 minutes, just over and over again, the same throw. Just do it and get more people to do it, and we're going to build our skills that way. Were there any other thoughts, questions before we finish up?
Do you have any advice on how to set potentially people who aren't so confident coaching up to run pods?
So we with Nexus, we often try to run a similar pod for everyone. So there would always be a little document that would say the first 5-10 minutes is going to be this throwing drill, and then we're going to work on. So it was often 5-10 minutes of agility, which would be a bit up to people to kind of decide what they wanted to do. But for a while, I think there was a specific sort of that snake drill was just the suggested one. So do the snake drill a couple of times with everyone to practice your agility. And then it would say throw for 5-10 minutes and pick a throw halfway through that you're going to throw for the second half. And then it would say, this week we're working on resets. So it would do the resets and then have some catching drills at the end. So I think all the drills are there and there's nothing that needs to be planned. It's just about saying, cool, we've done our throwing for 10 minutes. We're going to move on to the next one. So I think if you've got people who are not comfortable running a pod, then giving them all of the drills that they have to do. And even running one with them so that they can then do it with other people, so they can ask all the questions that they have. But I think a lot of people are comfortable if you've given them all the drills that they can just kind of go through the motions of, it's been 10 minutes of that drill, it's time to do the next one. Cool. Any other thoughts or questions? Sweet. I'm just posting my Google Doc that has the drills that I came up with beforehand. There's already people, you can go in and put the ones that you came up with during our discussions just now. I'll also put it in the event so that people can have a look at it. And it's, yeah, I think I've split into throwing, catching, and agility / speed, something like that. But it's lots of little ideas of drills that can be done with 2-3 people. Some of them might need 4 or 5, but if you can get a small group of people in a place to throw together, then there's heaps of ideas in there to work on different types of throwing and catching skills. Cool. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. I think it was awesome. Really good, useful.
Love pods.
Yeah, I love pod.
Let's have fun.
Thanks, Marah. We'll look back at
Thanks.
the start of the recording. Sorry.
Yes, yep, it's all recorded.